Okay, so for this video, we are going to be essentially working on this subframe here. We're going to be skinning the bottom portion of this subframe. This is mostly complete. We've already done the tank. We've affixed a quick release hood pin to kind of take the tank on and off. We've skinned the top, everything's finished welded. We've cut a slit for the light. I'm just going to kind of walk through the process on how we create a template, how we then transfer that template to steel. We're then going to bend that steel plate to form around the tube frame. We're going to then tack that, and then we're going to finish weld it. But as we walk through this, we're going to kind of try to finish weld so that we're optimizing our workload and have less work for ourselves later in the grinding and blending. Kind of going to work through like how I will like push and pull metal with filler rod and the torch in order to kind of accomplish that, and kind of fill those little gaps as you work so that you don't have to come back and fill them later. When cutting an arc like this with a jigsaw, it's very important that you actually clamp your workpiece. You're gonna get a lot of up and down motion just from an up and down moving blade. On certain gauges, you can kind of bend that. Even on this like a 16 gauge 060, you're gonna be able to bend this with your saw blade. You don't wanna ruin your workpiece. So just always prepare, make sure it's clamped down. And actually when you're running your saw, best thing you wanna do is actually kind of press out on the saw, I guess the opposite direction of your arc, if that makes sense. That's gonna allow your blade to kind of pivot through the metal. A lot of times people, I guess it's almost a similar principle to counter steering on a motorcycle. You wanna kind of press the opposite direction, and then that'll kind of guide your blade around your arc. Even an arc, at a 7-inch radius, it's not super tight, but your blade still has, it's gonna wanna kind of go wonky on you, but you can actually get very, very, very accurate, cuts in steel with one of these saws if you know how to kind of maneuver it through the metal itself. Fucking beautiful. So with our jigsaw, we were able to cut a fantastic arc in this piece of sheet metal. Next thing we need to do is actually kind of profile that in order to fit the kick in that subframe's tail. The way we're gonna do that is actually with a brake. I guess in terms of traditional ways of bending or forming metal, who knows? It's like whatever tools you have, make them work. So what I do is I make the brake work. I will essentially kind of mark incrementally marks on this piece of metal using my straight edge, and then I'll actually just ever so slightly nudge each bend on each line, essentially kind of forming an arc. So we're going to use points on a flat piece of steel to kind of create an arc. Just like infinite points in a circle, we're going to create points on this piece and actually create a radius. So what we have here essentially is the start of a curve and the end of a curve. We have a straight line curve and then another straight line. So what we want to do is we want to take our piece that we've cut and we want to find where that arc happens. So what we're going to do is we're going to kind of put that on there and roll it. And wherever it kind of touches flat, that's where our arc starts. So we can see as it lifts off the material here, that is where our arc starts. We want to start our positioning on that center line. So I can see that we've lifted right here, so that's where our arc starts. That's where I want to start bending that material. And as I roll it and it becomes flat again, I can see that lift up, and that's where I want to stop bending my material. So what we have is we have this range here of where we want to bend. And so here we are from the underneath from a different angle, so you can kind of see the way this rolls around as we find our arc. So we want to put that on that center line. We can see our lift-off point happens right there, so we essentially want our bend to start right about there. As we roll that around, we can see our flat spot happens right there. So that's where we want to stop our bend. So essentially that arc lives right in that space. So what I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna use my square and my pencil to kind of mark increments on this piece of steel in which we're gonna actually bend. So we have our 2 reference points there, 1, 2, and I'm probably gonna space everything out about a 1/4 inch in between. I'm gonna mark those just like that, just like this. 1, 2, boom. Okay, so up. All right, so we have successfully marked our piece here. What we're gonna do is we're gonna put this in the brake and we're gonna bend at each increment in a small push. I'm just gonna kind of like do a rough demo of how we get this done here. So we have our increments marked on our steel, right? We're gonna put it in and actually bend on each one of those little increments, just ever so slight, so that we can actually kind of form an arc in that space. Slight movements. Voila. So you can see a little bit better in the light here. You can actually see each little increment in which we bent. But that gives us a fairly nice arc in this little piece of steel. Essentially what we're gonna do is we're gonna tack this to the piece now. We don't have to be exactly perfect with this. Obviously we wanna be as close as possible because we don't wanna have to like push or pull things. But with that said, that little arc should be just fine. We can kind of, you know, press it out a little bit if we need to, but we shouldn't have to because it looks great. So we're back here under the bike. I'm gonna kind of show you from this angle. We incrementally kind of put our little piece of steel on the brake here. You can actually see each little crimp point on that little piece of steel. Essentially, we're trying to get as close of a match as we possibly can, which you can see we got a pretty solid match here. We can actually get a lot of fit up to work with some clamps. But you know, obviously the closer you are out of the gate, the easier things are gonna be. Okay, so we have actually removed the subframe from the bike. Just wanna show you guys that we have grinded a nice flat profile on these areas where we had seams, essentially. We want a nice mating surface for this plate to fit. So you can kind of see we get a nice tight fit there. We do want to clean up the project with acetone, essentially a rag with acetone on it. A clean project is a happy project, as they say, I guess. This kind of removes any like oil, anything that's going to cause your TIG torch to kind of flare up, spit, do anything you don't want it to do. So we're just going to wipe all this down with acetone, and then we will get it tacked. Okay, so we essentially have our plate cut, we have our plate fit up, we have our plate bent. We're gonna now tack this onto the tube frame. So essentially what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna be starting in these corners. Metal likes to move as you heat it up, as you weld it. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna tack these and then we're gonna clamp down on each side as we move to that center point so that we can kind of press everything nice and flat and then push everything that way. You know, we don't want to create any scenarios where we have any rises, so we're going to do pretty short tacks, like no more than maybe like an inch and a half apart, just to make sure that this mating surface is nice and tight, and that we will have a good place in which we don't have to fill too many gaps or holes in the two mating surfaces. Okay, so I've now removed the subframe from the bike. We're going to get this tacked and actually welded. Just want to show you guys a couple of different pieces here on the bike. We have this underneath section. Essentially what we've done is done some nice flat grinding here to get a nice flat profile. We want this piece of metal to be able to fit as tightly as possible. Obviously, we're gonna have to do a little bit of clamping, things like that. Doesn't have to be perfect in your bends. We just want to get a nice tight profile. Okay, so we have turned our machine on. I do have some preset settings on this machine that I use quite a bit. I'm gonna actually get out of those. We are using 2 different metal thicknesses. We're using 060 and then 120. So typical rule of thumb is 1 amp per thousandth. But if you're using a foot pedal, you can kind of control those variables. For welding the skins onto the subframes, I typically go to my standard TIG, and then I'll usually put it at about like 95. That way I can get enough heat to kind of get into that 120, but I'm also not burning through that 060. I have a lot of range in my pedal, so I can actually kind of manipulate that with my pedal. You'll be able to see what I mean in the video when you can actually watch the arc get brighter as I give more amperage through the pedal. Okay, we can see that we have just tacked these corners here, tacked that little center line here, and then tacked this corner over here. So you can see we have this clamped down now. We're gonna kind of work in small increments and really get that skin pressed down flat to that tube frame. We wanna kind of work with symmetry and kind of force that metal down as we go, having our last tack be at the peak of this arc here. I'm going to slide my clamps down and just continue tacking as we go. Okay, so there we are, all nice and tacked up tight. You can kind of see we have essentially no gaps between the tube frame and that skin. That creates a dynamic in which our finish welding will be much easier because we won't have to fill as many gaps. You know, this tacking may seem excessive, but it allows me to get a nice flat surface across the arc of the tube frame with that sheet metal. And also just leaves me, you know, less work to do, less clamping to do in the future welding. Okay, so now we're gonna kind of get into our finish welding here. I'm gonna do a little dry demo with a torch and some rod to kind of show you how I'm actually like welding through the base metal into the tube frame, base metal on both from the plate into the tube frame. We have 2 different thicknesses Heat's going to be an issue. One of them is going to melt much easier than another one. So you do not want to blow through your sheet metal trying to melt your tube. So we're going to be using filler. I'm going to have my machine still set at about that same 95 amps. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to pedal up. I'm going to start my puddle with my arc, and then I'm going to pedal up as I move. And the way I'm going to move is I'm going to kind of pedal up, and then I'm going to draw down. So add filler, pedal up, pull that down. 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 What that's going to do is that's going to take this filler rod and my base metal, and it's actually going to blend it into my tube, which will then create a profile that's much easier to grind. We won't have to go through and fill as much if we're actually filling as we move. A lot of guys might kind of like, weave that. I just find that if I pedal up, with my fiddler and pull it down, I get a nice, consistent kind of blend through, almost as you were like, smudging anything. So essentially what we're doing is kind of smudging through that metal with our filler and our tick torch. So once again, we're gonna get our arc, we're gonna get our puddle, filler, and then smooth that out. Move it, filler, pedal up, smooth that down as we go. Does that make sense? Awesome. So here's kind of a little bit of a better close-up of that motion, right? So we're gonna be pedaling up, filler, and then we're gonna actually pull that down just like that. We're gonna move, pedal up, filler, ramp it up, and then pull that down. Puddle, filler, ramp it up, pull that down. Does that make sense? Awesome. As you can see, I am wearing gloves, I am wearing welding helmets, I am not wearing long sleeves. However, though, I recommend wearing long sleeves. You don't want to burn yourself. I live in Portland, so I'm trying to catch a little bit of a tan right now. So that's the reason. Abracadabra. So here is our first pass of finish weld on that steel skin. You can see what I did. This is still hot, so I'm not going to touch it, but my starting point, and I pulled that down. You can see how that puddle is a little bit elongated, a little bit elliptical, but what I'm doing is I'm stretching that base metal down over the curve of that arc on that tube, kind of filling that gap that you get, that rise and that lift from the tube to the sheet metal, so that when I come back through and blend that, I've already filled my metal. I don't need to like try again. I'm not like creating more work for myself, creating more welding. Hopefully we'll be able to get a nice consistent grind and a nice solid profile in one shot. So there is our second row of beads on that sheet metal, and as I move this forward, you can see we've already almost profiled it. We just got to kind of smooth that out. So once again, you save yourself a ton of work by kind of getting that filler in one shot. Kind of see that that profile, that arc already is there. We just need to kind of like detail through it. Kind of take that little bit of proudness down. Okay, so here we are, finish welded. I didn't film every piece of welding because it gets real boring after a minute. But you can kind of see we got a nice fill around that entire seam. You know, working methodically, working in like, you know, increments of about like 20-ish beads. You can kind of see all my starting points here. I'll burn my finger, 1, 2, 3. That kind of helps manage our heat. Also just like keeps our hands in good positions if we can readjust our position. Obviously, like, you know, fantastic welders can just weld forever. I'm not a fantastic welder, so I will always stop and restart just to make sure I'm in a good position and I don't mess anything up. So what we're gonna do now is kind of go through our first grind. Ideally, you would have a compressor with some air tools. I'm just gonna be using a regular old angle grinder. You know, whatever works, whatever you have, obviously tools and time, things like that. But you know, you can still get a really, really, really great finish with just a regular old angle grinder. Fantastic. Okay, so now we're gonna kind of work through and grind our subframe here. What I have is I have a just regular old DeWalt angle grinder. I want to say it has a 40 grit, 40 or 60 flap disc on it. This will kind of help maintain some of those curves in our profile without being too harsh and aggressive. You don't want to use the fiber wheels or anything like that, the thing that comes with it, because you're just going to mangle it. So definitely invest in some flap discs. Your life will be a lot easier. What I'm going to do is really just kind of go through and, you know, profile this piece, more or less just shape it, you know, just kind of work through, try to get the high spots down and create a nice seamless arc on the piece. So we hit just a small section of this with our angle grinder and then a orbital sander with I think 60 grit on it. But you can see just in one shot, one grind, we get a really nice fill and a really nice seamless profile. So that's gonna be where you wanna be with your grind and fill. Essentially what we're gonna do now is kind of just continue this process. You can kind of see here a couple little areas where I may have to fill a little bit. That happens, but if you can minimize those, that's where you want to be. You can kind of see how that transitions into our proud weld beads, but we get a real nice, smooth transition from that sheet metal down to that tube frame. Okay, so we actually got a really nice clean finish on this piece, just right out of the gate. So I will actually not need to come back through and fill any of this. I was able to kind of get that filled with my filler as we did our first weld. Normally, you know, what might happen is you might have some little spots that were maybe a little too low that you might have to come back through and hit with a little bit more filler, but we were able to actually get that through without needing to do that. Kind of see we get a nice clean seamless profile. I guess we get a couple little spots right here, but we could actually probably just hit those one more time. I did hit this with a orbital sander just to kind of clean all the metal up, just so it looks nice and pretty. But yeah, you can kind of see we get a very nice seamless kind of finish on that. So there we have it. Essentially kind of the process in which we go about skinning a subframe. I guess this process could be used to kind of skin anything in steel sheet metal, any kind of tube frame. You know, I'm really kind of working on doing other things, more forming and shaping, but until then, that's kind of the process for these subframes. We now have a nice finished piece, nice finished welded, seamless transitions between these edges here. Next up on this particular project is going to be a seat pan. I'll actually kind of work through that process as well. And then this will be ready to go out to the client. So yeah, we kind of see we get a nice, smooth transition there in that coverage. Once again, this is Sean at Distill Moto. I want to thank you guys for tuning in. Thank you guys for kind of following these projects. I really enjoy doing these things. I would do them no matter what. I love all the questions. I love when I can answer someone's questions, so please keep them coming. If you want to see more videos, please let me know. I'm going to keep doing this and see what happens, but I really appreciate your time. Appreciate you watching, and thank you so much for everything. Once again, website is www.distillmoto.com, and Instagram is @distillmoto. Thank you for watching. Hope you have a wonderful day, and enjoy yourself.